What if the life you've been chasing doesn't begin with one big opportunity? What if it begins with one tiny promise you make to yourself and keep? Most people believe success arrives with a lucky break, but nature has never worked that way. A mighty forest begins with a single seed, a river begins with a single drop, and a thriving beehive begins with a single bee returning home. This is the story of a young man who stopped waiting for a better life and quietly began building one. Nestled between rolling green hills in a peaceful valley of northern Scotland stood the tiny village of Glenhaven. Stone cottages lined narrow country lanes. Wildflowers danced beside old wooden fences. Every morning, soft golden sunlight drifted across endless fields of lavender and clover. Life moved slowly here. Nobody seemed to be in a hurry. Yet one man carried the weight of tomorrow every single day. His name was Elias Rowan. At 29 years old, Elias had recently inherited his late father's tiny beekeeping farm. Calling it a farm was almost generous. There were only 6 old wooden hives. Most were cracked. Some stood empty. The storage shed leaked whenever it rained. The honey extractor barely worked. The family savings had almost disappeared after years of medical bills. When neighbors visited, they spoke kindly, but their advice always sounded the same. Sell the land. Find a safer job in the city. Your father worked his whole life and never became wealthy. Don't waste your youth chasing an impossible dream. Elias never argued. He simply nodded. But every night, those words echoed louder than the gentle buzzing of the bees outside his window. One chilly spring morning, Elias opened the oldest hive. Almost no bees remained. He watched them crawl slowly across broken wooden frames. For a long moment, he wondered if everyone else was right. Maybe this place had already reached its end. Maybe some dreams couldn't survive reality. As he quietly closed the hive, an old pickup truck stopped beside the gravel road. It belonged to Walter Green, an 80-year-old farmer who had lived in Glenhaven longer than anyone could remember. Walter climbed out slowly. He looked at the quiet hive, then at Elias. "How many healthy colonies do you have left?" Elias sighed. "Only one." Walter smiled. "Then you have enough." Elias frowned. "Enough for what?" Walter rested one weathered hand on the old wooden hive. "To begin." Elias looked around the nearly empty farm. "I don't think one hive can change anything." Walter chuckled softly. "No, it can't change everything. But it can change tomorrow." Those words stayed with Elias long after the old farmer drove away. That evening, instead of making plans he couldn't afford, instead of worrying about 5 years from now, he quietly picked up an old notebook. At the top of the first page, he wrote only one sentence: "Tomorrow, I will make one hive stronger. Not 10, not 50, just one." It looked almost too simple, too small, too ordinary. But deep inside, for the first time since his father's passing, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt like something he could actually do. And sometimes, the smallest promise becomes the beginning of the greatest journey. The next morning, Elias woke before sunrise. The village was still asleep. A thin blanket of mist rested gently over the hills. The air smelled of wildflowers, fresh earth, and morning dew. Only one sound filled the quiet valley, the gentle humming of bees, beginning another ordinary day. Elias walked toward the weakest hive, not with confidence, but with commitment. He repaired one broken wooden frame. He tightened one loose nail. He cleaned away the damp leaves beneath the hive. Before returning home, he whispered to himself, "One hive is stronger than yesterday." That was enough. Days slowly became weeks. Weeks quietly became months. Every sunrise, one small improvement. One repaired hive, one new flower bed, one lesson learned from a mistake. Some mornings, the bees rejected a new queen. Some flowers never bloomed. Heavy rain washed away the seeds he had planted.
There were days when Elias wondered if everyone had been right. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Then he remembered Walter's words. One hive can change tomorrow. So he kept going. Not because every day felt successful, but because every day mattered. Summer quietly arrived. The hills surrounding Glenhaven exploded with color. Purple lavender stretched across the valley. White clover covered the fields like tiny stars. Butterflies floated gently through the warm breeze. The bees became stronger. The hives became louder. And, without realizing it, Elias was changing too. He no longer rushed through his mornings. He noticed which flowers opened first, which trees offered the coolest shade, which bees returned earliest before sunset. For the first time in years, he wasn't living inside tomorrow. He was finally living today. One warm afternoon, a local school teacher named Emma Carter arrived with several children. They wanted to learn about bees. Elias smiled nervously. "I'm not really an expert." Emma smiled back. "You don't have to know everything. You only need to know a little more than someone who's just beginning." Those words settled quietly inside him. Elias carefully opened one hive. The children watched with amazement. They asked endless questions. Why do bees dance? How do they find flowers? Why does every bee keep working? Then, one little boy raised his hand. "Do bees ever get tired?" Elias laughed softly. "I'm sure they do, but they still find their way home." As soon as he said it, he realized something. Every difficult morning, he had chosen to come back. Again, and again, and again. Autumn arrived. Cool winds drifted across the valley. Golden leaves covered the country roads. The first jars of honey were finally ready. Not hundreds, only 23. Elias placed every jar carefully onto an old wooden table at the village market. He expected people to walk past. Instead, an elderly woman stopped. She tasted one spoonful, closed her eyes, then smiled. Warmly, "It tastes like this valley." A young couple bought 2 jars. A nearby cafe owner asked if he could order more every month. By sunset, every single jar was gone. Elias looked at the empty table. It wasn't the money that filled his heart. It was something much deeper. People weren't buying honey. They were buying patience. They were buying care. They were buying hundreds of quiet mornings that nobody else had seen. 3 years passed. The tiny farm looked completely different. 40 healthy hives filled the fields. Lavender stretched across the hills. Butterflies danced above thousands of blooming flowers. Children laughed during school visits. Young farmers came to learn from him. One peaceful evening, Walter sat beneath the old oak tree. He looked across the beautiful farm, then quietly asked, "So, when did everything change?" Elias smiled. He looked toward the very first hive. The oldest one, the weakest one, the one everyone had told him to abandon. Then he answered, "It never changed in one day. It changed every ordinary morning when I decided not to quit." Walter nodded slowly. A quiet smile appeared on his weathered face. That's how every meaningful life is built. That evening, Elias rested his hand on the first old beehive. The gentle humming inside was calm, strong, alive. His father had never left him great wealth. He had left him a place to begin. And suddenly, Elias understood. Success had never arrived the day he sold his first jar of honey. It arrived on the quiet morning he chose to repair one broken hive instead of giving up. Because life rarely asks us to change everything today. It simply asks us to care for the next small thing right in front of us. And perhaps that is how every extraordinary life quietly begins.